Hey there, everyone. It's Tyler Robertson here today to talk to you a little bit about the solution selling process. And this is a video I've been meaning to make for a while. I've been working now in sales for about a year and a half, a little longer than that. And when I first got started in doing this, I didn't understand this topic at all. So I wanted to take some time to actually get to understand this before I have a conversation with y'all about it. Because I think this would have been really useful to me, especially when I was starting. And I think it'll be useful to you too if you're interested in going into a sales engineer or solutions engineer or a solutions architect type role, right? Because a lot of people, especially if you're coming from like the engineering side or you've worked in an organization before, you might not have exposure to this. And so this can just be helpful to get an understanding of what this job actually looks like and what the selling process is. So what I'm talking about today really just comes from my experience working in cloud sales. So for people that are working in products and more specific things that aren't maybe like solution selling, it might not be a direct one-to-one, but this is a pretty similar process. So I don't think it's going to be too far off. But anyway, let's get started here. And I'm just going to walk you through, and this is kind of a different format than I've done before. I've just sketched a bunch of stuff out here on Notepad. So what we're going to do is kind of a little follow along. And I'm just going to kind of type and put down ideas in my head as we go, talking about which each of these things is, and hopefully it gives you something you can take notes off of. So first off, the solution selling process. So like, what is this anyway? From a high level, there's a giant sales cycle, right? The giant sales cycle starts all the way at the beginning of a customer being interested in something, or maybe not even a customer being interested. It could be them hearing about something, all the way to a company or organization delivering a product or service. So it's a very long process. And specifically the pre-sales side. That's all I reside on. I don't do delivery work. That's another team. I'll talk about that when we get to closing and handoff. But that's kind of where the line in the sand is for pre-sales. So when I'm talking about solution selling, I'm just talking about pre-sales. I'm not going to go into delivery. That's a whole different conversation. And I don't honestly think I'm qualified to talk. So the first thing you need to do when you're working with a customer who is interested in buying something is to go ahead and qualify the ask. So you want to know who you're dealing with. And naturally, the best person to go to when you're talking about qualification is the account executive. So the account executive, if you're not familiar with the account executive, they are like a representative that works specifically with the customer, and they're tied to those accounts, and they have long-standing relationships with anywhere from one to many customers. So they're going to be involved in a lot of the ongoing conversations the customer has about business initiatives, about business drivers. So they're looking at all these different things. But really, what you're trying to figure out here are what are their business requirements. And the account executive is going to be one of the best resources of information for figuring out that customer in that way, right? To be a little more specific here and kind of provide you a framework that almost everybody works with, we're going to just roll through this fun little acronym here, BANTC. Some organizations just do BANT. It doesn't really matter, but what does matter is the actual stuff that's being gleaned from it, right? So the first item that we're concerned with when we're asking about qualifying is budget. So budget, the main reason why you even want to know budget in the first place is can the customer afford this, right? That's important to figure out. If they can't afford it, you're never going to be able to sell it. So that's maybe one of the most essential questions, but there are plenty of ways to get around this problem, right? Maybe they just don't know how much it costs. That could be possible, right? They're out doing a little bit of price hunting. They need to know what to budget. Right? They're trying to come up with a number. And so it's exploratory. They might come with an ask and think that something costs something. They don't know how much. And so they're trying to explore that with you, right? So the budget it's not a deal ender unless they legitimately have zero money and don't plan on spending any money at all. It's not a showstopper, but it's something you definitely want to be aware of. The next thing that you do want to know as soon as you can, who are the authorities in the conversation, right? And what we mean here are key stakeholders. You really want to know who are the people that are going to be driving this conversation and ultimately the decision makers. in the conversation, because you could talk all day to a bunch of random people and try to convince them to do something, but if they can't actually sign on the dotted line saying they're ready to do services or commit to change, then you're kind of wasting your time and theirs. So it's okay to have people that are not the decision makers in some of your calls. It's okay to give information to people that aren't decision makers, but ultimately, when it comes down to doing the contract, you're going to have to know that information. So that's why I put that out here. The next thing you need to have is an actual need. So, the customer is coming to you with a request, right? What is it? What is the need, right? And what you'll often find is that the stated need is often kind of layers apart from where the origination is. And what I mean by that is there are business drivers that ask, that require a organization to start looking for solutions, right? And getting a sense of what that problem is in the first place will actually help you get to this need better. But up front, they might just come across and say, hey, we want an AWS landing zone, right? But underneath that, it might be that they're really struggling with management, right? They're struggling with managing their environment. They're struggling with securing their environment. They're struggling with operational overhead, many different things. There could be a variety of reasons why they're coming to you about that, and they say they want a landing zone. But it's important to just kind of feel around this and get a sense of what that need is and other things that are going on that the customer is concerned about, so you're not just walking in this totally blind. Because as I said, the need that they're going to tell you often isn't the actual thing that they're going to end up getting. So just keep that in mind, right? The next thing you need to know, or at least have awareness of when you're headed into this, is the timeline, right? And really what you're looking for here is the urgency out the gate, because if it's really urgent, then you're going to need to move quickly. And the urgency really drives the customer too, right? If they have something they're trying to get away from, or they have a big problem that needs to be solved very quickly, they're a lot more likely to want to get this done quickly and actually buy from you. However, if they don't have urgency, then it might just be a planned project, right? And what does a planned project mean? It really means that they have a longer timeline. They've probably gone through the process of budgeting for it. They've had conversations about it internally, but now they're getting to the point where they're ready to do something about it. The thing is when they can be deliberate, they can spend a lot of time comparing different options and going through this whole process. So they're not necessarily thinking like, we need to buy. But when you're getting an understanding of timeline, you want to know, that level of urgency there, because that's really going to drive how you approach this. And sometimes they'll be very upfront about their timeline. So if you can get the timeline, then try to get that from them. If they'll tell you, usually, we have a 90-day timeline, right? That this needs to be decided upon. That's great. That gives you something to plan off. You can do all your backwards planning. You got, time to work with. You don't have to use the whole thing, but at least it gives you an idea. Once you have that information, then you're better prepared to, build a solution around it, right? Because you need to ultimately know if you can deliver in that timeline too. Figuring out, the time from when they are, receive the contract to when they're actually going to sign it. How long is that going to take? But everything you need to figure out ahead of time so you know if you can actually deliver. So that's why that's so important. And the last thing in this fun acronym is competition, right? And when we're talking about competition, I mean competing companies. It could just be another company that offers a similar service or product to what you do. And most customers are not going to come out right and say that. They're going to kind of hold their cards to their chest. But why do they do this? Is because they're trying to get a price comparison. They want to know what the actual price is in the market. And that's not always easy to find, especially with solution selling. It can be very variable between different companies just based on their approaches, based on their price per hour, all these different things. But that's what they're trying to get a sense of, right? So when we're talking about competition, that's far from a showstopper. If they've done business with you for a long time, they might be less likely to look at competition. If they haven't done business with you before, well, then they're almost surely looking at competition. But it's just something to know. But it's not going to make or break you when you go into the conversation. So really, what we figured out here so far, right? We've had this qualification. We figured out our band TC. We've gone through all this. We've started to have a good conversation and figure out like what are all these things, right? And this is before we've even talked to the customer, right? We're trying to figure out all this. We're going to continue to develop these things when we get in there with the customer, but this is just some good starting information. But then, the final thing you want to figure out, and hopefully find this out sooner or later, is can we provide this service? And that's very important to figure out, because as I said, if you can't provide the service, you need to let them know sooner than later, so you're not wasting their time, and you're definitely not wasting your own time, because there's no point in trying to chase a deal you can't win. So if you see something in here that throws this off, right? They come and say, you have 10 days to deliver this thing. Okay, well, you're looking really quick there. You're going to have to hold your horses. So maybe that doesn't work. Or they come in and they say, we have $5,000 to do a $50,000 project. Well, that's a no-go. That's just not going to happen, right? Those are things that can, end the deal. But assuming you've made it past this point, now we kind of get to more of the fun thing, right? So this opens up the next step, which is sitting down with the customer and having an actual discovery and scoping process. So what goes into the discovery and scoping process? The immediate thing is lots of questions, right? We're talking about all sorts of questions. We're trying to figure out everything we can, but at the same time, trying to be somewhat strategic with this. So like we mentioned earlier, we need to refine the BAN-TC information. And so that's a back and forth conversation you're going to have with a customer. But the other thing that you're trying to figure out here on top of those requirements is the actual technical requirements. So let's go back for a second to the landing zone conversation, just to try to figure out, why they need a landing zone, right? And so part of this is figuring out what are those stated requirements, right? That they've come up with on their own, that they've already identified. This makes it easier for you, right? You want to figure out what those stated requirements that they're going to give you up front are, so you don't have to fuss and fight over it, right? So let's say that we'll go with this scenario that they want a landing zone, right? So they want a landing zone. Why do they want a landing zone? Well, you start digging a little bit and you find out that they are trying to move from on-prem into the cloud, right? That's a good starting point. Many a customer has that thing. So they're going on-prem into the cloud, and they want to do that in 12 months, right? That's a pretty long time frame. Could be for a decent sized company. For a big company, that might be a little short. But looking at 12 months, right? They're plenty of time to plan in this case, right? And why do they need the landing zone? They need the landing zone because they want a fresh environment to work in. They want to have something that's going to have best practices, right? They want to have something that's going to be secure. They want any number of other things, right? But what we're getting at here is that we're starting to paint a picture of what this ask really is. So it started off as they want a landing zone, but why are they doing it? It's because they need to go from on-prem into the cloud, right? And so now you're getting into some of the details. So what are some of the things that we're going to have to build? We're building them a landing zone. Well, what else is included in that? Well, it sounds like they also have a migration in there. So they're in the process of migrating to the cloud. So we need to figure out what the workloads are that they're going to be migrating. What are the applications they're going to be migrating? The amount of data. So many other things, right? All these different technical requirements that we're figuring out. And the customer might be able to provide some of them, all of them, none of them. But you definitely want to get a picture of what that's going to look like. So all this is just going through the process of figuring out what those requirements are. And this can be a really long process. This might not just be a single conversation or a single meeting that you have with a customer. It could be many different meetings with the customer to finally really nail this down. I just got done with a customer that I worked with 3 separate meetings going through this process. And the first meeting was pretty much just pushback. And then the other meetings were having, more focused conversations around the actual technical requirements. So that can be a way of doing it. Sometimes you figure out everything in the first call and it's great. It's just gravy. And you have a great conversation and they're just, on board. You guys are really jamming. And it goes really easy. But part of this, right? So like I said, is getting those stated requirements, but you also really want to figure out what are those other unstated requirements. And these are kind of the gotchas that I think customers really pay for when they're looking at picking out a consulting company or somebody to work with. They're looking at you to be able to give them that information and insight, right? So maybe they're moving workloads and we find out in the process that they're moving workloads and they identify that there are Microsoft workloads, right? And so, if you've been in AWS a minute, you know the complexities of Microsoft moving to AWS. But one of the things that should definitely perk your ears up is the licensing situation, right? So when we're talking about licensing, that opens up a whole different can of worms. And one of the things you want to figure out very quickly is whether or not they have software assurance. Or as we call it, SA, right? Because that can really determine how they bring those workloads over to AWS in the first place, and it can really change the expense there, right? So these are maybe unstated requirements. Maybe the customer walked in and they didn't even realize that that was a component that they had to deal with, right? Software assurance, but you've helped illuminate that for them, right? So they now know if they're going to go through this whole process of building a landing zone and doing all this stuff, and this ends up being super expensive and they didn't realize it because of all the licensing considerations. Then they're like, oh, maybe we should go to Azure. And maybe I should have brought this up sooner is when they're talking about going to cloud, it's like, you need to ask why. Why are they going to cloud? Beyond that, and like, why are you picking that CSP? Why that CSP versus another one too? So that's a lot of the questions you're doing, right? Are just getting at the why. And I think, I talked about requirements, but a lot of it does start with the why and kind of leads into those requirements. So don't be afraid to ask that. And as my mentor, Clinton, always likes to say, like, use it from the perspective of a curious child when you're asking these questions. Because from that point, you're not judging them, or you're not saying, why. You're saying like, why? I really want to know. I want to get at what are the reasons that you're doing this so I can help you, get what you're really looking for. So that's something, right? When you're going through this, make sure you're asking why on top of those requirements, because all this is going to boil down eventually to when we get into our solutioning. So, you've had this conversation now with the customer. You've gone through, you've refined your band TC. You've gone through the technical requirements that are involved here. You've gone through stated requirements. You've gone through unstated requirements, and you've really gotten to the why. And you've started to get an idea and maybe, provide some advice to the customer about what this thing's going to look like, right? And so you're really getting a sense of what a solution could look like. But this is where we get into what I think is probably the most fun part about being in this job, being a solution seller, is actually doing the solutioning. This is kind of a different phase, right? A lot of this is going to be a back and forth conversation with the customer. But a lot of it's also going to be on your own. So this is where you really get to crunch your expertise, and we'll kind of get into what solutioning looks like, right? One of the most important things with solutioning is, first off, that you are referencing accurate documents, right? Always good to go back and look at the documents that you have in front of your face and make sure that you're building something off of what is most up to date. Because often with cloud service providers, they will make updates or they'll make changes to services, and sometimes you don't always have the most accurate thing. So just go back to the documents. It's never going to hurt you to be working off those. And also, in addition to working off documents, it gives you a lot of credibility when you consistently refer to the actual documentation versus just try to do it off the top of your head. Another thing that you can be doing when you're going through solutioning is figure out how you're going to kind of map this out, right? So one of the best ways to do this is just to get like a whiteboard or something like a lucid chart to be able to sketch, right? You want to be able to take your ideas and put them down somewhere. So as you're going through and building things, you're getting a better understanding of what the solution is going to look like. And the reason that's also important is that, what you want to get out of this is really an architecture. Because at the end of the day, when you're coming up with a solution, whatever it might be, you want to have something that you're going to be able to hand off to the delivery people on the other side that gives them a good indicator of what needs to be built. And this is not like some permanent thing. You giving them the architecture and saying this is how it's going to get built doesn't mean that that's exactly how it's going to be built to a T. It just gives them a good design starting point. And as well as other things that you're going to include, like having a list of artifacts and a few other things that you throw in there. It just gives you a point of reference and a starting point, right? So, like I said, you've gone through, you've started to look through the documentation, you've started to sketch, whiteboard. Maybe you've done things like maybe a mind map too. I should probably throw that in there. you've gone through the process and you're starting to make an architecture, right? So here's the fun part for me, right? And this is where you get to apply architectural thinking. What is architectural thinking? Well, it's being able to take a lot of those different design considerations and form recommendations off of them, right? So you've gotten all this information, you've gotten all these business requirements, you've gotten the technical requirements, you've gotten at the why, and now you're getting to the point where you're ready to talk about, taking those business requirements and map them to technical requirements and ultimately create a solution. When we're talking about architectural thinking, what we're trying to get at is a solution. You might have a rough sketch in your mind of what that might look like, but through applying architectural thinking, you're going to end up being able to come up with a solution. Where do we start with these solutions, right? We'll go back to the requirements. What were those business requirements? First and foremost, that we really need. And, some of those got identified by just knowing budget, timeline, all those, but, you've identified other requirements while you were going through the process, right? So maybe they have a compliance need, or they have a security need. They have a timeline, right? That's really tight. But you've gone through and you've kind of figured these things out. So you have those business requirements, but then you've also gained your technical requirements. And so now that you have all that stuff, you can start putting together that solution using architectural thinking. So what does a solution look like, right? So a solution is just a recommendation. That's all it is. It's just a recommendation based on all the requirements and being able to map those out. And every single solution that you do is going to have trade-offs. And this is really, really important to emphasize whenever you're having a conversation with a customer is there are many different ways to do this, and each one of them has a trade-off, and some of them might be better for you than others, right? It's important to know what the things are that the customer really needs when you're going and designing the solution, of course, but also understanding that even that has trade-offs, right? So maybe they have something that it's going to meet every need for them, but it's also going to be expensive, and maybe it's going to be way outside their budget. And that's often a good place to kind of push back and say, do we really need this full functionality, or can we do this at 80% of what you're saying is a requirement, and then we get something that's affordable, right? That you guys can actually implement, that isn't going to be prohibitively expensive and still meets most of your requirements, right? So maybe that's what it is. But as I said, every single solution has trade-offs. So it's really important that you understand those and you're able to make them. And as you're going through this, you're going to have multiple solutions probably that are going to come out of this, right? You might be mix matching a bunch of different things. It's not just going to be, AWS based solutions. You might be able to find, vendors. You might be able to find products. There are, integrations that could make their lives easier while you're going through this process. So this is the chance for you to really get into the actual, like the skunk works, and figure out what is the thing that is going to work for them. And often this is a very collaborative process, because you're going to have to talk with some people that maybe know more than you about certain things. So there's something maybe that surfaces where you're going through this engagement, while you're doing the solutioning, and you just don't know the answer. And so that's where you can start reaching out to different people, look at, what are all of our options, and actually get informed about those things, because it's tough making solutions. There are going to be things that you miss. There are going to be things that often you're just not even thinking about, because you maybe haven't seen that problem before, or you've done it so many times that you started forgetting like little things along the path. So it's just important that you're trying to collaborate with other people to fill those gaps, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally to be expected, especially if you're in a solutions role. So be collaborative while you're going through this process. But yeah, what you're going to get out of this, like I said, you're going to get multiple solutions, and they're going to come from many different ways, right? And at the end of that, what you want to get is a list of recommendations, right? The solution itself is a recommendation, so you're going to have a list of recommendations by coming up with a bunch of solutions. And what your real goal is to inform the customer of their options. That's important. That's really what you want to get out of this, right? Because this is going to go into a proposal that they're going to have to make a decision on. So the better you do to inform them, the more information you give them, and the more opinionated expertise you can provide, the better prepared they're going to be to make that decision. So that's what all this is, right? This whole solutions process is just about getting to the point where you're able to have actual recommendations to give to the customer that's going to come out in a proposal, right? Okay, so we've gone through this process now. We've stepped through from the qualification. We got into the discovery and scoping. We've done the solutioning now, and now we're ready to get to the proposal and recommendations. So this proposal, right? What is the proposal? Usually it's going to be in the form of a document, a slideshow, some sort of a deliverable that you're going to give the customer for them to look at, evaluate, and make a decision. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to have some conversation that you have with a customer to be able to talk this. What you're going to show them during the course of that is you're going to actually talk about the requirements that they had. So you're going to go over those again, just to make sure that you guys are all on the same page, that you didn't miss anything, that they have a chance to voice their objections, not objections, but obstacles before you get down to closing this. So whatever you've maybe missed in there, it gets surfaced, then you can fix it, right? But you want to get a sense of those requirements. Then, once you've confirmed that those requirements were true, then you go through the process of showing them those solutions. And ultimately, those solutions are going to be in the form of recommendations, right? So you found that you have, solution A seems to be the best fit. And then, you also have a solution B, which might be a better fit for certain reasons, right? Maybe there's some extenuating circumstance or some other reason why you might want to do solution B. Maybe it's a lot cheaper. But that's a reason to consider it, right? So you have a solution B, and then maybe just to round it out, you have solution C too. So you have maybe a total of 3 solutions, but you're really pushing solution A because you think that's the thing that they actually need, that is the best balanced of the items that you care about here, right? And so that's what the proposal should effectively do, right? You're giving them all this information, you're proposing, all these different solutions. And then at the very end, you're giving them, what the services are that can be provided to accomplish those solutions. And then ultimately, this is just kind of a litmus test for what the customer wants, right? They're going to let you know in their proposal by, voicing different concerns they have about the solutions, by critiquing them, what their level of comfort is going forward. Once you know that information, then you can go forward and actually provide a statement of work to them, right? So if they're like, we agree on this, now we want a contract. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? So you've done all this work, you've gone through this whole process, and so now you're finally ready to make a statement of work. So we'll talk about a statement of work really quick. And I don't know how many people know what a statement of work is. Maybe you've run into it if you're in an organization, maybe you've had to review one that somebody else has done. So a statement of work is just a contract. Really simple. It's the work that you're saying that you can perform according to certain standards with certain parameters, right? So the most important stuff that you're going to include in a statement of work is what is in scope. So any of the services rendered, that's going to be important to understand. What are the expectations of that service? And then also, what are the restrictions? What are things that are out of scope, right? The things you can't perform that are not going to be a part of the engagement. And so when you're going through the process of creating a statement of work, you want to be as detailed as possible, but you also don't want to be too detailed. Because if you try to be ultra explanatory, then the delivery engineers on the back end are going to be like, this thing is so strict, we can't maneuver. So you don't want to give too much information, but you definitely want to get at those high level things. So when we're talking about what's in scope, you're looking at high level items that need to be performed. So when we're talking about a landing zone, you're talking about the actual discovery work, you're talking about the design work, you're talking about the deployment of the landing zone, and then finally some validation of it, that it works and is functioning as intended, right? And those are the high level items. And you can go a layer deeper than this too, and talk about what, some of those things are that are going to happen, just because you need to actually have that written down. So the customer has a sense that you haven't just put 4 things on a piece of paper and you're going to do it. You're actually going to do these things, and you've thought about the process of it, and you know what those are. So you're going to do that, right? But you don't want to get down to the details of, you're going to type X command into the keyboard. Don't do that. That's not going in your statement of work. Nobody likes that. You're just going to bug your friendly neighborhood delivery engineers on the back end. So that is the statement of work, right? And ultimately what comes out of this statement of work is a signature, right? So you're going to get a signature. There's a bunch of other things in there. There's boilerplate. There's all this legal jargon, terms of the contract, that kind of stuff. But what is going to come out of this is the signature, right? So, once you have this statement of work, then you've completed this document. It's going to be probably like in a PDF format. And then you're going to send this off to the customer. And then this is the process of actually closing, right? So you're going to now, send that SOW to the customer, and they're going to have it in their hand and they're going to decide what to do with it, right? And this is kind of the fun part in sales. I haven't talked about the actual sales component too much yet, but I'm going to get into that in just a second. So this is where you get to do objection handling, and objection handling is a lot of fun. It can be really intimidating when you first get it, but when you first send your statement of work to the customer, you're going to get to do this. And some customers are more fussy than others. Other ones are just give me this thing, I'm ready to sign, I'll do it right now. And you're just going to find out that you have different types of people that have different ways of negotiating, right? But that's what you're doing here, really. You're just negotiating at the very end. This negotiation, it's meant to be friendly. You're not here to do this, well, if you don't do this, blah, blah. It's not like that. It's you're negotiating the distinct details. So what I found is helpful is just go over the in-scope items and just review them, right? Like go over what is the meat in this contract and what are the things, right? And maybe the customer comes back and they, say they don't like something about it, or something else needs to be included, or they don't feel like they're getting their money's worth, or a number of things, right? But you're there to handle those things and then be able to explain, how you're going to resolve that, or maybe they just don't understand something that's in the contract and they need you to clarify that, so you provide clarification. But this is really an opportunity to be able to actually sell the thing, right? You've come up with all this, you've done all the work, and a lot of your work, frankly, is done at this point. They've agreed to the proposal, they liked what they saw, so at this point, they have the contract in front of their face. They are going to have to just make a decision of whether or not they're going to sign. And so, really, what you're looking at in this phase, right, is to get a yes or a no. Usually, the yeses come pretty quickly. I've seen it where it can drag out for a little bit, but you never know exactly what's going to happen. But I found that most customers, typically, if they're already bought in on it, they've been bought in for a while, and they're just looking for you to finally put the contract in front of their face to say yes. And if that happens, great. But also, if you get a no, that can be a little nerve-wracking the first time. Maybe they come up with that and they say, we don't like what's in this contract. But no doesn't always mean no. And I'll explain there for a second, right? For all the people that have not been in sales, it can be weird when somebody tells you no and you actually are like, well, what if this or what if that, right? So the no in this, a customer might say no for a number of reasons, but if you get a no on price, then maybe all it is just a matter of renegotiating what's in the contract. And I think a really good question is always ask is, what isn't in this contract that you would have liked to see at this price point? And if they don't have an answer to that, then often it's just they don't have the belief that you're going to deliver what you're going to actually say you're going to deliver, or there's something else that's missing and it's not actually price. But if they can't, if they can tell you something, then just put that in there. or figure out a way that you can meet that through some other means, right? And maybe it is adding something. Of course, you want to be cognizant of increasing the work. So if it is a sizable object, you definitely want to be aware of that. But a lot of the times, it's just something very simple, or it's not that hard of a thing to do. So if you get the price and they come back and say no on price, it isn't always that, right? But that's where this closing part, it can be kind of fun, because you have all sorts of customer objections that they're feeding you, and you get to learn how to deal with each one of them. I could go into this. There's a lot more to it than just obviously price. Sometimes you get ones that they have very specific needs. They need to have things done in a certain order. They have like very short time frames for certain things, or they want your contract structured a certain way that's going to make their legal department happy. But you have a lot of different things that at the finish line, they're going to throw, and you just got to be ready to handle it. And the cooler you can be in the pocket, the better you're going to do with this. And as an engineer, that might not be something you're super comfortable with, but you need to get comfortable with it if you want to be a solution seller. So, at the end there, as I said, they're either going to give you a yes or a no, but if they do give you a yes, it's all gravy. So after that, it's going to be signed. You're going to take a copy of that. You're going to feed it over to your project management team for intake. And then at that point, it's going to the delivery team, and you'll be in a few more meetings. You're going to have your kickoff, your project kickoff. You're going to do a handoff of information. So hopefully you've gone through the process of like where you're doing the proposal and recommendations and the solutioning and all that. You've got notes, you've gotten architectures, you've written out a bunch of stuff that you can hand off to the delivery people. So they're not starting off with like an empty slate, right? You want them to be as informed as possible walking in with the customer. Also just makes the customer feel comfortable when you've given them a lot of information and they're just ready to go. So that's where you're going to be at. But yeah, that handoff occurs, and yeah, somebody else takes it, and you can kind of watch it and see how it goes. I like to attend meetings even after the fact, just because it doesn't end, right? Just because you sold them, you have a relationship that you're still working on. So it's important to know, how did that actually go when you wrote the contract, when you came up with a proposal. What was your planned idea versus what actually happened? And sometimes there's a delta there. And so if you can sit in on those meetings and understand that, you get to know what that delta is, and then turn that information, get it from the delivery people and then from the customer, and turn that into a better product up in the front. Offer better services that are better fit for the customers you're going to be talking to. So I think it's still important to stay involved. But yeah, that's the pre-sale side. And I touched a little bit into the other side, but yeah, this is really at a high level, all the things that are included. So, I hope this was helpful, that we got the chance to go over this entire thing. There's probably some stuff I left out in there, as well, that I just didn't remember while I was talking. But I hope, as I said, that it gives you a picture of what this actually looks like day to day, and how you're going to walk through this with customers, because part of the process of getting over to this is not always being the engineer. You don't always need to be the engineer every moment. You need to be plugged in and wearing different hats throughout the process. You need to know how to talk to different people at different levels. So you're constantly adjusting, but you're always staying in focus of, what are the customer's needs? What are their requirements? And how can I provide services that support those? And as long as you're doing that and you're being responsible and you're doing it in good faith, acting like a partner to the customer, it's going to go well for you. And if you keep practicing and doing these things, you're going to get better and better and better at it. There's no way to get better at this other than to go through iterations, and some of them are not going to be great and other ones are going to be excellent. But you're going to learn everything there is to know about it just by going through this. So yeah, that's been my experience. If you have any questions, please reach out to me either here on YouTube or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm also available there. It was great talking through this with you, and I hope it was useful. Catch you later.